Let me start with a dangerous question, the kind most people are afraid to ask. What if what you call good and evil were not an eternal truth written in the stars, engraved in the nature of things? What if it were, in reality, a human invention, created by specific people at specific moments in history, for reasons that had far more to do with power than with purity? That was one of the boldest questions Friedrich Nietzsche ever threw at the world. And it is so disturbing that it needs a warning before anything else. Because this is, without exaggeration, the point where Nietzsche is most distorted and most dangerously misunderstood in all of philosophy. So listen carefully. Going beyond good and evil does not mean that everything is permitted. It does not mean that cruelty is acceptable. It does not mean that killing, stealing, betraying, or destroying others is free. It does not mean there is no right and wrong. Whoever takes Nietzsche and uses him to justify doing evil, to feel like a Superman above the rules while stepping on others, has understood exactly the opposite of what he said. That person did not overcome morality. They just used a beautiful name to hide their own barbarism. What Nietzsche actually proposed is something far more difficult, far more serious, and far more mature. He did not want you to abandon all notion of right and wrong and go do whatever you please. He wanted you to stop obeying in the dark, to stop blindly following values you inherited second-hand without ever examining where they come from, who created them, and whom they serve. To go beyond good and evil is, for Nietzsche, the invitation to the most radical responsibility there is. To look your own values in the face and ask, with courage, why do I believe this? If you're willing to ask that question, even if it's deeply uncomfortable, then stay. Nietzsche has 7 truths about good and evil. They will not give you permission for anything. They will give you something far more valuable, the ability to see. First truth: good and evil are not facts of the universe. They are human inventions. Start here. When you say something is evil, what exactly are you claiming? Are you describing a physical property of the act, like its color or its weight? No. Nowhere in the universe does a particle of evil exist. If you dissect a cruel action atom by atom, you will find evil nowhere. Evil is not a thing that exists out there in the world. It is a judgment that we humans project onto things. This does not mean that suffering isn't real or that cruelty doesn't cause genuine pain. It does. Nietzsche's point is more subtle. The categories of good and evil with capital letters as absolute and eternal truths were not discovered by humanity observing the universe. They were created, constructed over thousands of years by cultures, religions, and groups of power. They are human inventions, not laws of physics. And why does this matter so much? Because the moment you believe your moral code is an absolute truth fallen from the sky, you stop thinking. You obey. You never question. But the moment you realize that these values were constructed by someone, an inevitable question arises. Constructed by whom? And with what intention? The first truth is dizzying. The table of values you carry in your head, which seems so obvious and natural, was written by human hands. To recognize this is not to destroy morality. It is the first condition for truly understanding it. Because what seems natural and eternal is precisely what we have never examined. The fish is the last to discover the water it swims in, and our values are the water our minds swim in, so present, so invisible, that we forget they were ever created at all. To you watching, if you had never stopped to think that your values were constructed and not discovered, write one single word in the comments: tablet. Whoever writes it is beginning to look at their own mind in a new way. And whoever reads it will understand that examining your own beliefs is not losing them. It is finally, truly owning them. Second truth: who defined what is evil? The origin of values has a history. Here, Nietzsche does something brilliant in his work On the Genealogy of Morals. He proposes that we carry out an excavation, an archaeology of our values. Instead of accepting good and evil as starting points, he asks, where did these words come from? What is their history? And what he finds is surprising. Nietzsche argues that originally, in many ancient cultures, good meant something like noble, strong, powerful, full of life, and bad simply meant its opposite: weak, low, common. It was the strong who defined the values, and they saw themselves as good. But over time, there was a great reversal. The weak, the oppressed, the resentful, unable to defeat the strong by force, inverted the table of values. They began to call evil what the strong were: the pride, the power, the self-affirmation, and good what they themselves were: the humility, the obedience, the meekness. Notice what this means. I'm not saying this new morality is necessarily bad. The point is something else, and it's devastating. What you consider the absolute good may have been born not from a divine revelation, but from a very concrete, very human, very historical struggle for power. Values have a genealogy, a family tree like anything else. They did not fall ready-made from the sky. The second truth is unsettling. Behind every great moral system, there is a history of real people fighting for power, for survival, for meaning. Knowing that history does not force you to abandon your values, but it forces you to stop treating them as unquestionable truths and to start understanding them as what they are: human constructions with an origin. And here is the liberating detail. If a value was constructed, it can also be examined, and, if necessary, reconstructed. What was made by human hands can be remade by human hands, including yours. You are not only the inheritor of values, you can become their author. Third truth: the same action has been both virtue and sin, depending on the era. If good and evil were absolute and universal truths, they should be the same in all times and all places. But they are not. And this is one of the simplest and most powerful proofs of what Nietzsche was saying. Think about how many things were considered deeply virtuous in one era and deeply wrong in another, and vice versa. There were times when revenge was a sacred duty of honor, and not avenging your family was the true dishonor. Today, we preach forgiveness. There were cultures that saw humility as contemptible weakness and pride as the supreme virtue. Behaviors that one generation condemned with horror, the next generation celebrates as freedom. And the opposite happens all the time, too. This does not mean we should throw everything into relativism, thinking nothing matters. But it does mean we should have humility before our own moral certainties. Because if history teaches us anything, It is that many of the things we hold today as absolutely right or absolutely wrong will be seen completely differently a few centuries from now. Our moral certainties are inside time, not above it. The third truth is humbling, in the good sense. Your conviction that something is obviously right or obviously wrong is, in part, a product of the place and the era in which you were born. To recognize this does not paralyze you. It makes you wiser, more careful, and less arrogant in your judgments. Think of how many people throughout history were absolutely certain they were right, and today we look back at them with horror. What makes you think that you, of all people, were born into the one era that got everything right? Fourth truth. The great danger? Confusing different from me with evil. Here is one of the most dangerous traps of the human mind, and Nietzsche saw it clearly. We have a deep tendency to label as evil simply what is different from us, what threatens us, what we don't understand. Remember the parable of the lambs and the bird of prey? The lambs call the bird evil, not because it is objectively evil incarnate, but because it is a threat to them, different from them, acting in a way they cannot. This is one of the most hidden and most dangerous functions of the word evil. Often, when we label a person, a group, a culture, or an idea as evil, what we are really saying is, this is different from me, this threatens me, this I do not understand. And by sticking on the label of evil, we give ourselves permission to stop thinking, to stop understanding, and sometimes even to commit atrocities, because, after all, we are fighting evil. See the tragic irony. The belief that one is fighting against absolute evil has already justified some of the greatest atrocities in history. The most dangerous people rarely think of themselves as villains. They think of themselves as heroes fighting evil. That's why the simplistic category of evil can be so dangerous. It turns off thinking and turns on violence. The fourth truth is a warning. Be very careful when you label someone or something as evil. Ask yourself honestly, is this really evil, or just different from me, threatening to me, incomprehensible to me? That question alone already makes you a more just and less dangerous person. And don't fool yourself into thinking this is weakness or tolerance of everything. Remaining able to recognize real cruelty, real harm, is essential. What Nietzsche asks is not that you stop judging, but that you judge better. Fifth truth. Morality can be a cage, or it can be a choice. Now we arrive at the practical heart of all this. There are two completely different ways of relating to morality. The first is to live it as a cage, following rules you never examined, obeying values you absorbed without noticing, feeling guilty for things you never consciously decided were wrong. In this mode, you are a prisoner of a code you don't even know the origin of. You obey in the dark. The second way is to live it as a conscious choice. It is to examine every value you carry and ask, do I really believe this? Does this make sense to me? Does this make my life, and the life around me, better, richer, nobler? Or do I carry this only because I was told to carry it? And then, after that examination, to consciously choose the values you want to live by, and to take full responsibility for them. Notice the abysmal difference between the two. In the first, you are a slave to other people's values, even if those values are good. In the second, you are the conscious author of your own morality, even if many of the values you choose are the same as before. The difference does not necessarily lie in the content of the rules. It lies in whether you examined them and freely chose to follow them or not. The fifth truth is liberating. The question is not whether you have values. Everyone does. The question is whether you chose them or merely inherited them in the dark. Breaking out of the cage does not mean abandoning morality. It means transforming it from an inherited prison into a conscious choice. And the curious thing is that often, when you examine an old value, you decide to keep it exactly as it was. But now it is yours. You no longer follow it because you were told to. You follow it because you understood and chose. That invisible shift from inherited to chosen changes nothing on the outside and everything on the inside. Sixth truth. Going beyond is not abolishing morality. It is creating your own, consciously. Here we need to undo the great misunderstanding once and for all. When Nietzsche talks about going beyond good and evil, many people imagine a world without any rules, a nihilistic anything goes where nothing matters. But that is the exact opposite of what he proposed. Nietzsche despised the nihilist who says, "Nothing matters, so I do what I want." For him, that was weakness, not strength. What Nietzsche proposed was to go beyond that specific, inherited, unexamined, automatic morality, which he sometimes called herd morality. To go beyond it, not to fall into nothingness, but to rise to a higher level of responsibility, that of creating your own values consciously. The human being Nietzsche admired was not the one who had no values. It was the one who had the courage and the strength to forge their own, to be the legislator of their own life, instead of a mere follower of other people's rules. And this is far more difficult than simply obeying. Obeying is easy. Anyone can follow a ready-made code. But to examine everything, to discard what doesn't hold up, to keep what makes sense, to create what's missing, and to take full responsibility for that creation, that demands an immense strength of character. To go beyond good and evil is not the path of the lazy and the cruel. It is the path of the most courageous and the most responsible. The sixth truth redefines everything. To go beyond good and evil is not to sink below morality to the level of the animal that only does what it wants. It is to rise above inherited morality to the level of the conscious creator who chooses their own values and answers for them. It is not less demanding. It is infinitely more. Seventh and final truth. True maturity is responsibility without ready-made excuses. We arrive at the summit of everything. Why did Nietzsche consider it so important to cross this dangerous journey? Because in the end, it is about growing up, about leaving moral childhood and entering moral maturity. The child obeys because the father commanded it. He doesn't need to understand why. The rule comes from outside, from an authority, and he simply follows it. Many adults live their entire moral life like children, obeying rules because someone, somewhere, commanded it, without ever understanding the why, without ever taking responsibility for their own conduct. When they act rightly, it's out of fear of punishment. When they act wrongly, they say it was the fault of circumstances, or that everyone does it. The moral maturity Nietzsche challenges you to reach is the opposite of that. It is to act well, not out of fear of punishment, nor out of blind habit, but because you examined, understood, and chose those values. It is to no longer have ready-made excuses, not the "I didn't know," not the "it was society," not the "I was just following orders." It is to look at each of your choices and say, "This was me, this I chose, and for this I answer." The seventh truth is the final call. To go beyond good and evil is to take full responsibility for your own moral life. Not less responsibility, but far more. Not less ethics, but a deeper ethics, because chosen and not imposed. That is the true meaning, and it is the exact opposite of permission to do evil. We have reached the end of our journey. 7 truths from Nietzsche about good and evil. Let us recap, and recap well, because this is a theme that is easy to distort. First, good and evil are not facts of the universe. They are human inventions. Second, these values have a history. They were defined by concrete people in struggles for power. Third, the same action has been both virtue and sin depending on the era, so have humility in your certainties. Fourth, be careful not to confuse different from me with evil, because that confusion has already justified atrocities. Fifth, morality can be an inherited cage or a conscious choice. Sixth, going beyond is not abolishing morality. It is creating your own consciously, which is harder, not easier. Seventh, all of this leads to moral maturity, to total responsibility without ready-made excuses. And I emphasize it because it is essential. None of this is permission to do evil. It is exactly the opposite. The person who does evil and justifies it with Nietzsche is living proof that they understood nothing. Because the person who truly crossed this journey does not have less moral conscience. They have far more. They can no longer hide behind, "I was just following the rules," nor behind, "No rule is valid." They have to look at each of their acts and answer for them, personally, without excuses. Nietzsche did not give us these ideas to free the monster within us. He gave them to us to force us to grow up. He saw a humanity that treated morality the way a child treats a parent's orders, obeying in the dark, without understanding, and fleeing responsibility whenever possible. And he offered a harder and nobler path, to become a moral adult who examines, chooses, and answers for their own values. A child needs to be told what is right. An adult must decide and live with the weight of having decided. If this video stirred your certainties, good. The discomfort is the beginning of thinking. Write in the comments, which value that you always considered absolute had you never stopped to question the origin of. Be honest. I will be reading every single one. If this video made you think in a new and deeper way, drop your like. That tells the algorithm there are still people willing to face hard questions with responsibility, instead of fleeing from them or distorting them. Subscribe to this channel. It is not for those who seek easy answers. It is for those who are ready to take full authorship of their own life. Next week, we will return together to the abyss, to dissect another hidden mechanism of the human soul. Until then, remember one thing. The most dangerous person is not the one who questions their own values. It is the one who never questioned them and obeys in the dark without knowing whom they serve. Go and become the conscious author of your own morality, not to do whatever you want, but to finally know, truly and fully, why you do what you do.